Hi Larry, my name is Lloyd Chapman. I'm president and founder of the American Small Business League. And for about a decade, I've been suing the federal government under the Freedom of Information Act to expose fraud and abuse in federal small business contracting. Federal law says 23% of all government contracts should go to small businesses. My calculation is the federal acquisition budget is about $1 trillion a year for both classified and unclassified contracts. That would be about $230 billion a year. Congress realized that small businesses were the engine of economic growth in 1953 when they passed the Small Business Act. Still the case here today, but you don't hear it on television. You don't hear it in the media. You don't hear President Obama talking about it. You don't hear Congress talking about it. But the Census Bureau says small businesses create over 90% of all net new jobs. The Chapman Foundation says small businesses have created 100% of all the net new jobs since 1980. And yet, almost all the economic stimulus that's gone to businesses has gone to large corporations. So my solution to job creation, economic growth is it's real radical. Ready? Quit giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. Quit giving small business contracts to Finmeccanica in Rome with 75,000 employees and $33 billion in assets. Quit giving federal small business contracts to Rolls-Royce. Quit giving federal small business contracts to British Aerospace. Quit giving U.S. government small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms and their subsidiaries. That's my wacky conspiracy theory. I would imagine probably, 99% of the people that watch your show would agree with me? So I've written a bill called the Fairness and Transparency in Contracting Act. It's been introduced into Congress by Congressman Hank Johnson. It's real simple. Federal law says a small business shall be independently owned. Well, that means not publicly traded. There's no such thing as a publicly traded small business. So my bill simply says the federal government would no longer report awards to publicly traded companies as small business awards. Pretty logical, I think. Free, easy, no new taxes, no new spending, permanent solution to job creation and economic stimulus. Simply quit giving small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. In 2005, the SBA Inspector General issued Report 515 that described the diversion of federal small business contracts to large businesses as, quote, one of the largest challenges facing the Small Business Administration and the entire federal government today. That's pretty heavy, don't you think? The entire federal government today. So that's Lloyd Chapman's wacky conspiracy theory that gets me bumped off the TV shows like yours every month. I don't think we should give small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms. And all I'll talk about is these investigations by the GAO, by the SB Office of Advocacy, by the SB Inspector General. Just the other day, Larry, Peg Gustafson, the SB Inspector General, testified before the House Small Business Committee and said for the 7th consecutive year, the diversion of federal small business contracts to large businesses is the #1 challenge at the SBA. So we're talking about approximately $200 billion a year in existing federal infrastructure spending that should be going to the small businesses where most Americans work, where most of the gross domestic product is generated, and where over 90% of all the U.S. exports and probably close to 100% of the jobs being diverted to Fortune 500 firms. I think that's a bad idea. And I really don't think President Obama is sincere in talking about job creation when every day his administration gives small business contracts to companies in Europe. And by the way, something that nobody knows, if they haven't talked to someone from the American Small Business League, President Obama is trying to end the nation's oldest and most successful program to create jobs for minorities that was established by the Civil Rights Act. It requires 5% of all government contracts to go to minority-owned companies. He's going to abolish that. They announced plans about a month ago. So I'd love to come on your show and talk about this. All right? Thanks, Larry.